So, Neel, you are not Patrick, and everybody knows that you're not Patrick. Patrick is on the disabled list, as we call it in the United States. Apparently, he's been punching walls and dislocated his pinky finger, I think, which is like particularly brutal. He's in a cast, and he's on the DL for the moment. We're trying to bring him back and rehab him as quickly as possible. But in today's show, we are going to talk about Chelsea and Arsenal, a pretty spicy little game at the weekend. We are going to talk about the mess at Spurs, which has been predicted and is now coming true. Liverpool had a good game this weekend, which is a little unusual. And then we want to talk about PSG, which is only interesting to people who want to pay attention to what was the best team in the world, and a couple of transfer rumors that are intriguing. Oh, and just in case Liverpool have a bad run and they decide they have to change their coach, we're going to talk about potential coaching swaps for Liverpool to do this season. So if you're interested in any and all of that, stick around. Right, top of the show, got to start with the big match this weekend, which went into this as number one versus number two. It didn't end the weekend that way. What'd you think about Chelsea versus Arsenal?
Well, it was. I think it showed that they are probably the top two teams in the league, and there is a. I mean,
That is such a bold claim right off the top. My word. Okay.
okay. Well, I mean, yeah, I would obviously like Arsenal are clearly better. This game was obviously a pretty kind of unique one as well because of the red card, and not the best of performances overall from Arsenal. But I mean, surely we all agree that Arsenal are by far the best team. I'm putting Chelsea second at the moment because I'm not too sold. I mean, I've spoken before as well. I'm not too sold on City and like the sustainability of how extremely reliant they are on Holland right now. And
Holland ball is the opposite of haram ball. Like, it's just very
yeah,
dependent on
yeah,
one
yes,
person versus
yes,
dependent upon the whole team.
exactly. That's exactly right. But Chelsea in this game, I think what impressed me the most was how they defended both, at the start and also after the red card. I thought they still did quite well, and absolutely deserved the point at least. And that's I would say an improvement from even the start of this season, because I feel Chelsea have had like fairly regularly games where they get exposed. Often the kind of culprit was their like very player oriented system, especially in midfield, where they try like chase people around. And like I think of the Bayern game in the Champions League where they just got like pulled apart super easily. We didn't see that here because Arsenal also tried a lot of rotations in midfield. Like Rice or Zubimendi were dropping back to pick the ball up, kind of like Bayern do with their defensive midfielders. But this time, Chelsea didn't take the bait. They kept like a very solid, disciplined block as they was drifting around, but like no one got pulled out too much because of that. And yeah, I mean, I think before the red card, it was Chelsea were 4-1 on shots. So it was obviously a very quiet game as well. But I would say Chelsea executed quite well, and showed. I would say not just this game, but also in midweek with the Champions League game against Barca, where obviously it was not the full strength Barca team, but they also restricted them very well. I think over this week, they've, to me at least, shown that they have a pretty good defensive level. And if they can maintain it, like at the moment, I would say that it's close, obviously, but I would say they're second.
Okay, so I looked in the newsletter today and I wanted to look at, have Chelsea actually gotten any better? Because I was intrigued by this concept. And what I found in the newsletter was that almost every stat was the same year to year. Like through a
Yeah.
third of the season, their expected goal difference is almost identical. Their shots conceded is almost identical. Their shots taken is nearly identical. It's fascinating, and they have an almost identical stat line to what Manchester City have, which I thought was also really interesting in and of itself. I think there's like two questions here. Like one, the one thing that is like really in Chelsea's favor on this season versus last season is that they've had a number of red cards that have hampered their potential performances. And I think that, from a gambling perspective, we would look at red cards and we would downgrade, the potential output for them and possibly upgrade the actual output based off of that. They have had a weird set of problems around red cards. The Caicedo one, he's their most important midfielder, and that was a really quite nasty challenge. So not a huge surprise there. But I think the other thing they've got going for them is they seem to be able to learn a little bit and start to play a slightly different style. As you
Yeah.
said, the way that they were playing before was solvable in some ways for the good teams. Like the good teams were able to go after them, to pick at certain spots, to drag players out of position, and then create really good chances. In this game, I actually thought they had the better of it for most of the first half, even without the after the red card. Like they still seem to be on top of Arsenal. Now, this is not a full strength Arsenal team. And in fact, this is a relatively sort of battered Arsenal team that was coming off of a midweek as well against some pretty good teams. So, don't take that as like this is amazing. But the way that they look seems like they are on that cusp. Now, I don't really feel like the need to sort of answer, is City going to finish on top? Is Chelsea going to finish on top? Because like second and third doesn't really matter either anyway. But the numbers are basically the same. But I do think that this was like positive for a team that had a lot of uncertainty coming into the season. Not much has actually changed, but the rest of the league is like so thrown up in the air that like we don't know how anything that's going to happen other than Arsenal's probably going to win and Wolves and Burnley are probably going to get relegated.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually kind of what they've benefited from, right? Is like you said, they've pretty much kept most things consistent season on season, while City and Liverpool have obviously changed a fair bit, and not everything's going for them. Arsenal also kept they've obviously added some new elements, but kept, I would say, the base consistent as well, and are kind of getting success off of that. So there's probably some value this season at the top to be had through that. But like one of the main, I think, differences between last season and this is, so I was actually looking at the like trend lines from starting from last season onto this, and the way it went for Chelsea was it kind of started similarly, but then they had this part, from around October to the end of the year, where their games got quite open. There was transition ball going. Jackson was running around a lot. He was getting in behind tons. They had quite open games and got good results. It's worth remembering. I checked, I think around mid-December last year, they were second in the league, 5 points off Liverpool. Obviously, I don't think anyone, well, at least anyone who was looking at the underlying numbers, thought that they were actually going to go all the way, but they were getting good results, and playing pretty open games. And then Maresca got spooked by transition ball, and he decided to shut up shop. And he did get the defense much better, but at the cost of the attack. And that's basically kind of the story of Chelsea from last season.
They also had
Now
injuries in
this,
that second half of the season as
yes,
well.
yes,
Like
of course, yes.
and Jackson didn't come back seemingly full strength. Palmer's been kind of injured off and on for most of this year. So
Yeah, but then going into this season, like the start was kind of similar in that they was like kind of going towards that transition ball trajectory. I think they had a few games like around that buying after that Bayern game. I think they lost to Brighton and United, and then they had that game with Liverpool, which obviously the last minute winner. But then, like, I think this season they couldn't really fully go down that route. Obviously, one, because, well, that's kind of what they worked on for the second part of last season. But also two, because they not sold, but let go of Jackson and haven't got a like for like replacement. So they don't have that kind of striker who can really lead their counter attacks anymore. I mean, whether it's Joao Pedro, who like isn't pure real striker, or even Liam Delap, who isn't that quick. They can't really threaten as much on the counter. And if you look at like their radars, in their attacking radar, the like you say, it's pretty much the same. The only clear difference is their counter attacking shots have gone way down. Like it's a massive difference on just counter attacking shots. So I think that's the main kind of change they've had between like this first period of last season to the first period of this. And I wouldn't necessarily say it's a bad thing. Like if they can keep improving defensively and putting together performances like these, I still think there is enough in that attack. I mean, I think last week Kim wrote in the newsletter about their wingers, showing some signs of promise. Certainly, like Stevao, Garnacho to some extent, and they've also actually, the other thing they've improved in is set pieces, because they're second in the
their
league
set
for
pieces
set
is
piece goals.
much more effective, and on a per set piece basis, they look like basically one of the top two teams in the league. It's taken them 2 years. Last year, they did not look like this. I will note that, like in this game, at least, like the Arsenal had neither Gabriel nor Saliba to open up play. And
Yeah.
this would have been the time that like a really good center forward would have taken advantage of sort of the current center back pairing. And it was notable that like Chelsea just lacked that position. It just felt like there was something missing there. Arsenal will be frustrated that they did not get 3 points out of this. They have a nice solid lead at the top, but obviously anytime that even when you go away, you get a first half red card for your opponent, you're like, okay, we should end up taking this. And Chelsea were quite good defensively in containing all of Arsenal's chances. So yeah, I think that there are reasons for optimism. I think that they've sort of stabilized a lot. It's consistent, but mostly it's that the rest of the league has gone particularly weird, and particularly Liverpool in this case. And so Chelsea just kind of have floated a little bit higher just because everybody else went down in the table. Let's talk about Liverpool, because I think that that's pretty notable. Midweek, there were names that started to be floated in the press, like should they replace Arne Slot? It's been a pretty upward rocket on the 5 wins at the start of the season, and then a very steep downward decline, culminating in like just the midweek Champions League of a 1-4 loss to PSV Eindhoven, where I think they had 27 shots to 9 at Anfield. So things happen, but all of this was like this wonderful moment for the press to come out and do what they always love to do, which is take a team that looks like they're a big team in crisis and then say, all right, they should definitely fire the manager or head coach or whatever you want to call him. And then they should hire another better head coach, which is, it's always available to people, like never a problem. Did you see the list of head coaches that were initially floated, which might have been, well, I don't know. I don't want to tease it for anybody. Like we'll wait.
Yeah, I mean, my only reaction is you should just go and hire Peter Bosch, because look at what he did. He beat them 4-1. Let's have it.
He's always available for the right price, I think. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe he wants to stay in the Netherlands these days.
Yeah, maybe he's done going out, getting thrashed, and then coming back. So he's like, I'm just going to stay at PSV now.
Most Dutch head coaches have decided that the Netherlands is a safe space for them, and then outside the Netherlands is very hostile, at least in a footballing area. I have to read this list because it might be the single worst list of head coaches that I've seen for Liverpool ever, at least since a very long time. The top name was Ange Postecoglou, which
love it.
Why not? Xavi Hernandez, former Barcelona manager, never considered elite by anybody at the head coach space, but Eric Ten Hag was the third name on this list.
Yes.
And the fourth name
now we're talking.
Has deep Liverpool roots, and it's Steven Gerrard, who you have not heard since he disappeared into Saudi, but was previously very successful at Rangers. And we know that Rangers and Celtic are definitely good stepping stone moves for all future successful head coaches of Liverpool or past
like
head coaches. Yeah, exactly. Or past head coaches of Liverpool, like Brendan Rodgers.
Yeah. He might also be available, actually.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Brendan's available. Why not?
Yeah. Good option.
Is there anybody that can help solve this problem? Is there anyone that can solve the problem, or should they stick with Arne Slot, who I feel like we have to remind people just won a title in his first season?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think Patrick and I spoke about this last week, where the idea is very simple: is if there isn't a clear better option on the market, it would be very silly to sack Slot and then do what. Now, these options are in fact not better. As you don't really need us to tell you that, but they're like the only point where I might get tempted is obviously, one, if things continue to go significantly downhill from here, and two, Xabi Alonso becomes available.
Now for those of you who are not fans of Spain football or Spanish football, please update everyone on what has been happening in La Liga recently, because I think it's quite intriguing.
Yeah, it is. And to be honest, like I wouldn't say I'm like 100% have my head around it, but basically there are certainly a lot of reports, certainly a lot of noise around Xabi Alonso's position as Real Madrid head coach, and there's some reports saying members of the squad are kind of asking for him to be sacked. There's obviously been this kind of theme of like this discord between him and certain players of the squad ever since almost the start of the season, because he's been benching some star players. I mean, Vinicius most notably. Like, there's always a story after every game where he's subbed off or on, where people will micro analyze every kind of hand movement he does. But I
That's
mean,
what
there
happens
probably
at
is
Real Madrid
something.
anyway.
Yeah,
But
true. Yeah,
when the big stars are unhappy and they're trying to push back against what is allegedly a crackdown on ill discipline in the squad, like, oh, some players go away after every match that has, like, you know, a non midweek match, and then they go away for 2 days, like, to some sort of exotic place and then come back. And you know, I can't see how that would be a problem for any coach that wants to have like a very disciplined group of players that are directed towards winning La Liga and the Champions League. It's not an issue, right?
yeah, should be all good. I mean, it's worth saying that despite all that, they're only a point of Barca in on the table. But I mean, yeah, the recent form hasn't been great. Last 5 games, the only win was a 3-4 against Olympiacos, the mighty Olympiacos in the Champions League.
Mm-hmm.
Three straight draws in the league: Girona this weekend, Elche last weekend, Rayo Vallecano the kind of previous week. So yeah, results have kind of gone down in recent weeks. But like, my obviously I don't know exactly what's going on off the pitch, but what I've seen on the pitch, on the whole, I haven't, to be honest, watched most of the recent games, but on the whole, I was like, I wouldn't say it was super positive, but I was like, I was pretty happy with what I saw from Real Madrid under Xabi Alonso. And it's worth remembering that, they had to undergo a pretty big kind of transition from Carlo Ancelotti, who did not believe in the concept of pressing, to now having Xabi Alonso, who does believe in that concept and has to get people like Mbappe and Vinicius to believe in it. So it's not an entirely straightforward job. And even just generally, I would say, well, one of the challenges obviously that Liverpool are and Slot are facing is that the squad kind of build isn't super straightforward, right? Like, he
Mm-hmm.
has a bunch of, like, obviously big name players, but also like people who don't necessarily always fit together. Like, what do you do about Wirtz? If you've got someone else, what do you do about Ekitike and Isak? And there's so many questions. And that's kind of similar to what Xabi Alonso is facing at Real Madrid. When you have
Exactly.
Mbappe, when you have Vinicius, how do you put it all together? Rodrigo, I mean, Bellingham, Güler, there's just so many. So from like what he's done with that collection of players on the pitch, at least, I would say there's a fair few encouraging signs. Not everything's gone well. Like, he had that big loss to Atleti in the derby, for example, which was some quite questionable tactical stuff. But on the whole, I think they've definitely headed in the right direction, shown like good principles on the pitch, and like, at least again, what we see with the reports of the Real Madrid squad, I don't think the Liverpool squad will have similar issues where they're like, oh, you can't make us train. We don't have a game in midweek. So I think that would probably go better. So if, and this is a big if, but if he becomes available and Liverpool can't seem to get back on track under Slot through, the next kind of month or so, it's an interesting option, I would say.
Yeah, I think so
What
too.
do you
I
think?
think that quite a different coach and quite a different set of tactics than they would have been used to.
Yeah.
Like, certainly not a similar style to Klopp. And if that's what they're looking for, then they're not going to get that out of Alonso. I think that the circus around Vinicius and Real Madrid has been a constant for the last 2 years. I think that that's something that like most head coaches would really struggle to deal with, because basically you're saying that this player or this group of players, and allegedly there are cliques around him that are aligned, are almost unmanageable. And as such, like, you either come on board and you take on the concept that yes, they are unmanageable and you're going to deal, like, that's just fine, which I think Ancelotti might be the best coach in the world at doing that. Like, Ancelotti was an amazing vibes coach. Like, he's been very chill for a very long time as far as we can tell, and he's a very talented coach as well. So like, players still respond to it. He has just unbelievable track record of success in knockout competitions. But yeah, he might have been the only coach in the world that could handle it. And so if they need to kind of adjust certain players, shift the culture of the club more towards a coach being able to still set the tone and direct the players, like they might have to solve that themselves, and that's a personnel problem that you can't fix with a coach if, again, they're uncoachable. I think Liverpool probably is coachable, and they have a much more solid, sort of consistent set of leaders in the dressing room. Whether that's true, as some of the older players cycle out is a question. But I think also, like, they're much less likely to let themselves become unmanageable. I think that they have like a very strong hold on what they want in terms of the ideas of around their team culture. I think Real Madrid have been really, really good up until the last 3-4 games. And so I would be surprised if they felt the need to make any changes, but I always appreciate the chaos of the Madrid media. Like it just feels like something that's made for us neutrals and not something that's made for like people that are Real Madrid fans.
Yeah, I mean, like we should say it would be an incredibly silly decision if they actually, like, I don't know who they get as a replacement for one.
Sure.
But as you say, whoever they get, like, all the best, like
Yes.
I definitely can't think of anyone who can actually like get better results out of this.
So you're back. I don't have to lead this stuff. Usually when like you're gone and I'm like, oh God, this is all hard. Like I can't do the Patrick role. I'm just the bald, noisy guy that thinks he's smarter than he actually is.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that does sound like you're a pretty good fit for my role.
Less bald, though.
Yeah, that's the only difference, though. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Spurs then, because obviously you wrote about them in the newsletter yesterday. They are kind of the big topic at the moment, I guess. After good results early in the season, their performances really have caught up with them. I think it's tempting for a lot of people to say, why have they dropped off from the early stages of the season? And in fact, this is kind of where they've been the whole time. But the results are genuinely horrible. And tonight, we're recording this on the Tuesday, tonight they go away to Newcastle, which I'm sure is going to be wonderful for them. Though maybe that's the kind of bittier game where their passing deficiencies in midfield might be less of a problem. But I feel like you and I and Kim and all of us have really had the same issue from the start with them, which is if you can't pass through midfield, you can't do much of anything.
It feels like an old truism that like some of the terrible announcers used to say, oh, the spine of the team is really important. But it's actually true. The spine of the team is really important. Like your center backs really matter. Your center forward really matters. And then these guys in the middle here, or girls, depending on which gender of football you're, or whatever genders you've got going, really important. And for Spurs, like we flagged this up early in the transfer thing. I feel like actually Spurs fans are somewhat switched on to the numbers, but partly because Kaylee's been like a long time metrics guy, and he brought plenty of the Spurs people along with them. Kim, obviously, early cartilage-free captain, which was sort of almost a Spurs news group / community. Anyway, long story. Spurs fans were like pretty like, oh, this isn't great for us. Like, we're not awesome. They didn't get over their skis on it, and it was very good that they didn't, because like now they're like, oh God, we are actually a disaster. It's just that like early we got some numbers and we got some luck, and now we don't. The problem is, what the hell do you do with this? And so often in football, like we're looking for quick solutions. And Manchester United seemed like, they were almost permanently looking for quick solutions. And then this year, over the last 2 years, they didn't, right? They actually sort of stayed pat. Like Emery was given time. They churned the team over. We didn't like the prices and necessarily the targets that they had in the transfer market, but particularly the prices. We felt like they, when you're overpaying by like 20 million for guys, like that's too much. And it doesn't matter if you're Manchester United, you still are kind of cap locked on the numbers there. For Spurs, it was more of a thing like, okay, this is the most important thing in your building. Like, you need to fix this. You have not addressed this in quite a long time. Do it. And then they didn't do it. And they didn't get anybody in that really moved the needle. And in fact, if you read the newsletter, like we talked about, they actually did the opposite. they got a worse passer in a defensive midfield spot. And you're like, oh, yeah, okay, well, good luck with that. I hope that the ball sticks somewhere, but I'm not sure it's going to. And now we're here.
Yeah, and the thing is that if they just had no money, I think that maybe they'd get a little bit more leeway, but they weren't behaving like in a liquid club. Like they were chucking cash around. And I think, Xavi Simon's it's possible that if he'd been there a couple of seasons, he might be able to fix some of this. You know, he might be able to be that guy who can actually link the thirds as well as being their primary creator in the final third. But he comes into the league, he's adapting physically, he's still a young guy. And on top of that, there's absolutely nobody who can pass him the ball. And on top of that, actually, there have been games recently where we've seen, you know, teams I think are getting smart about the fact that they know Romero is really the only guy who's going to pass out of this defense, so they can key on him. Porro hasn't started every game, and he's the other guy who's really a decent passer in this team. They have been unlucky though in certain regards. Okay, they were lucky early on in the season, but a lot of these games recently have been very close. And they've just turned into losses. I mean, the PSG one, actually, very close on the underlying numbers. This Fulham match, they gave up pretty much nothing, but they lose. They gave up pretty much nothing against United, though they created nothing. They gave up pretty much nothing against Villa, you know, the Villa game where they just like, it's a couple of bad goals. But this is the problem of trying to play tight, right? You know, that you
can't get anything back. There's no margin for error. It's like Fulham's entire last season, right? Like they're only playing tight the whole time. They're very average. They keep things to like low event, and they're not so bad at doing that. But then somebody's awesome player gets the ball and does a bit of magic, which is something that we love about football. But then you're like now behind, and like now what are we supposed to do? Well, we're not very good at catching up. We don't have Madison, we don't have Kulusevski, and we don't have anybody that like plays in sort of the back part of the midfield that can actually get the ball moving. So you're starting from a bad spot. And so the question then becomes like, what do you do? And one of the things that the transfer flow was built on was, we'll tell you when your director of football should be fired. And with Spurs, it's like a very muddy situation because like they did fire some people in the summertime. In fact, they hired the guy at the top effectively, which is Daniel Levy. They also got rid of Ange. They got rid of Scott Munn, who was sort of attached to Ange and helping out with the recruitment bits there and some football bits. And then Paratici's kind of always been around, is my understanding. Like I did multiple researches on this over the last couple of years because I'm like, isn't that dude banned? Like, oh, he's a consultant to like Daniel Levy. Like, all right, I guess he can't have an official role, but he has an unofficial role. But then they're still listening to him to do things, and then like Johan Lang is there too, and you're like, who's running the show? Okay, well, both of the two-headed sporting directors. Okay, well then this was a terrible window. Like you guys did like you got some young players that look like they're really good, but you have to build a football team for this year as well, or you just have to take your medicine. Or, you know, you can fire the coach and hope that you do better. But like the coach is not set up to succeed because the squad's not set up to succeed right now. Thomas Frank, you know, people like, oh, he doesn't really know how to coach and attack that much. Brentford have been pretty good over the years, but he's never had great talent there. But he certainly understands modern football, and he's the type of coach that can grow into personnel if you give him the personnel to allow him to do that. They don't have it. And that's kind of the big question about it. Like, should they be getting rid of the people that screwed up this window? Are they going to fix this window? Like, you know, we don't really know, but it's a complicated question that isn't simply answered by, well, fire this coach and get another one.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, there's absolutely no benefit, I think, of firing the coach unless some unmissable opportunity comes onto the coaching market. But even then, there are still going to be all these problems. Like you can have Thomas Tuchel come in and he's just gonna tear his hair out at these guys who can't pass straight. So I mean, in some ways, in the kind of medium term, and actually no, in the longer term, I think Spurs have had some bad luck with their midfield acquisitions over the last 10 years. Like there have been times we've quite liked their signings, right, and they didn't work out. Whether it was
Ndombele,
Lo
Celso, like Ndombele decided that he didn't really like football. And Lo Celso decided he didn't really like England, and coaches didn't like him. And he's like, well, that's hard. They have not had the best of luck, even when targeting players that we thought were pretty good. And then plenty of times they targeted players that might be on the cusp of it, and they haven't quite worked out. Like Betancourt is a guy that you felt like could have had another level, but he hasn't had it in the Premier League. He might have had that level in Italy where it was just a little less physically dynamic. I think this year is another thing that we see where the Premier League is so dynamic, and Xavi Simons is struggling with that. And most players that come into this league immediately are struggling with that unless they're surrounded by players that are really succeeding.
Yeah, so I think, you know, you get unlucky with Sarr, and you get Bergvall, who I think we all really like, but he's not a passer. It's like the thing that he does not do. He's a good defender, he's a good carrier, but you just don't have this other thing. So they're basically like carrying FC right now. You know, they've got to do long balls or they've got to carry. And I think this is where in the summer, we gave them a lot of credit for emerging from a mess with Xavi Simons. That was a market opportunity that presented itself because they did hold on to their cash and they waited. And the
You
Chelsea
mean
moved.
they had multiple transfers fell through for them for various reasons?
Ted, those were all smoke screens.
Okay.
Those were all smoke screens for the eventual master plan. But you do wonder if like Angelo Stiller could have been this kind of opportunity as well, where bigger moves kind of fell through, or even something like, I know he got injured, but Yashiri, who went off to AC Milan, somebody like this, like a good passer from an unfancied league, having that profile in the squad, even if they're not the best midfielder in your team, you can park that person next to Palhinha, and I think he should be able to cover the defensive work. So I don't really. There's no real way to be optimistic about them before the January window, as far as I can tell. It's just like they've got to get there, and then they've got to get somebody in. And if they don't address this issue again, it's going to be a rough campaign.
You just have to take your medicine sometimes. Sometimes you have too many issues and you can't fix them quickly. And sometimes you have to wait for players to come available or wait for money to come available. Like, United have so many sort of dead contracts on those books. Like they'll have real economic firepower in, the next 2 years after this, as some of those guys rotate out or they lower their wages. Right. So, Neel, you were going to fill us in on your take on PSG's struggles, because they are not the team that was the best team in the world in the first half of this season. They are something else.
What if I just turn this into a whole segment on like Le Havre, who they played recently? They beat 3-0 recently. It's just like, there's actually a really interesting story about Le Havre. Yeah.
You could do the segment in French if you wanted to. That would be like elite Patrickism.
Oh God, I think that's actually too much even for me. Maybe if I didn't have so many painkillers in my system right now. Yeah, okay. So part of the story here is injuries, right? Like that. This is the undeniable part of it. If you look down their squad list, then the teenager who they started up front the other day against Spurs, who I believe is called like Njantu, something like that. He's got roughly as many minutes as Desiree Doué, as Ousmane Dembele. Ousmane Dembele and Desiree Doué still have crazy expected goal and assist numbers in very, very small minutes. But these guys have had 300 minutes each. You've also got João Neves, who's missed a bunch of minutes. So it is really kind of 2/3 of the team that won the Champions League last year, plus a new centre-back actually as well, which is disruptive. And then the cream of Paris's youth talent, which is fantastic, but is not as good as Ousmane Dembele. And it's kind of hard to look beyond that. At the moment, when you look through their performances, it's just extremely erratic, particularly defensively. The attack still looks very, very good, but the defensive performances are like wildly all over the place. And I do think that some of that will get fixed as Zabani beds in, and if they get João Neves back, Hakimi, they're going to be missing for quite a bit now. So, but also the fear factor of their forwards, I think, is such a defensive weapon too. It forces teams to play on the back foot. So I don't have like a super complicated take, except that they will still probably win the league in France. I think we all assume that will happen. But they do look a level below where they were last season.
I think the thing that I'm seeing statistically is the exact same thing on both sides of the ball, except for inverted. So they're giving up still very few chances. Like they're still pretty good at pressing. It doesn't feel like they're not willing to press, but the chances that they do give up are usually breakthrough chances that are way too good at quality. Right. And that's always a problem. And often it's a problem with an aggressive high press that isn't quite clicking right. The other side of it is they are not creating great chances like they were last year. And that is a huge, huge difference, because they, when this team has all of its parts clicking, like they are so quick and they are so fluid with their passing into spaces, and you can't overplay anybody because they're so dangerous. Any one of them gets the ball and suddenly they're behind your back line and they're in 1v1 with the goalkeeper. This time around, they're having to settle for more shots from further away. That's then just creating some variation in how often they score, good goals versus not, or it puts the defense under a little more stress because they're in kind of 0-0 games or 1-0 games more often. So, they're not bad. I think that they have chance to sort of heal up really and sort of end up the team that they need to be in the second half of the year, which is important. Sometimes coaches lose track of that type of concept, but I think that Enrique is like, I feel like Enrique might be the most enlightened head coach like on the planet. I feel like,
wow.
yeah, I feel like this dude is just like, he's chill, he's got it, but he's got a little bit tighter grip than Ancelotti did. So in the first half of this show, you and I were talking about, Real Madrid and potentially Xabi Alonso, getting bounced early on. Maybe
I
having
loved
to go
that
over
part
to
of the show that
Liverpool.
we did together.
Yeah, I know, I know, and then you had lots of good points, so I always appreciate your expertise. And Enrique feels like he's just like, yeah, so I won some stuff, but I have standards, and I'm gonna coach my players into being better. And sometimes it takes time, and I'm gonna be frustrated about it. But like, I hope by the end of the year, we're gonna be a spot where like everything's clicking as we get into like the really important bits. And that's what happened last year, right? And so the question is, can he do that again this year? Because the talent is still there, but things happen year on year, so we'll see. It's kind of fun to follow though. Like I like watching the struggles of the super teams, especially when they're just not quite getting it, and more particularly when they have a good head coach. When they have an uncertain head coach, or like you don't really know what's going on, like certain red teams this year, you're like, I don't know. Nobody knows. AFCON's coming up. Maybe we'll learn more when people go away for AFCON. I don't know.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, I guess that the forgotten part of this is that Ousmane Dembele didn't become like the fire breather he was last year until January. It was really then that he went turbo. And I do think that when you coach a team like PSG, part of it has to be this team is not gonna, like, they can't get it up for the entire season. Like we need to give them the pills at the right point, because otherwise it's just like not gonna last. And I think after Christmas, you're going to be either top or within spitting distance of the top of Liga. You're going to be through in the Champions League, or worst case, you're going to have a playoff. But even then, that's very unlikely. At that point, you've really got to get them going for half a season. And like you say, I think Luis Enrique is a smart guy and has a clear idea of what he's willing to tolerate and what he isn't. I mean, I think that's what happens with like the experiences that guy's had in his life. He thinks I don't give a fuck about these idiots if they start behaving badly. So I still don't really worry about them. But yeah, as you was talking about that, I was looking at some of the stats, and they've lost about a shot season on season. But what's really happened is they've gone from 0.14 non-penalty expected goals per shot, the top in France, to 0.09, which is sixth bottom. I mean, that is
less than average. Like, we're just going to take pot shots from range and hope that it works out.
Yeah. So
it's not a recipe for priapism, is what you're telling us.
Exactly. Thank you. Good choice of word, by the way.
Yeah, kids, if you don't know what that means, look it up. Google's your friend.
Oh my God. Yeah. Great.
This is where you tell everybody that we have a Patreon that we're just about to record. Patrick and I are going to say horrible things about our friends, our families, our loved ones, or unfortunately, this time around, we're actually going to talk about players that we kind of love to watch that are not Arsenal players, which is like, I can't even, like, this is foul content, but someone decided that was a good idea.
It was actually incredibly hard for me to think of players currently playing that I like. I was just like, all these guys annoy me. Though, I found out today. Do you remember Sandro, who played for Spurs, the Brazilian who played for Spurs? Yeah. He's 36. He's my age. I thought he must be like 45. That guy's my age. It was a real moment of it was a very upsetting thing to discover in an NHS waiting room. It was the most painful thing that happened to me yesterday. But yeah, look, we're going to talk about some players that we like, non-Arsenal players. We're also going to talk about some of Ted's biggest mistakes in his football career, because people obviously wanted to hear that after Hayden and I did it. And look, our mistakes are the things that teach us, as everybody knows. So yeah, like, if you haven't subscribed to our Patreon, head over to patreon.com/thetransferflow. You can also send us questions, and we would love to answer them over there.
Yeah, we're going to do that. Unfortunately, I'm just like already stuck and sad about my biggest mistake. So let's go do that football therapy session so everybody else can live it at the end of the week.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being here today. Thank you for tolerating the terrible opinions of me, Neel Scheller. You can catch me over on your favorite social media apps. Just check me out. I write in a variety of places. I write in the newsletter. Anything stupid, any criticisms, just send them over to Neel.
Neel loves
Ted, thank you very much for being here. It's nice to see you after a long time away, and we'll see a bunch of the rest of you
Nice to
over
see
on the
you too.
Patreon.
You and your kung fu grip.
Yeah. Bye.